إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله الله بالهدى والدين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا. أما بعد فيا عباد الله أوصي نفسي وأوصيكم بتقوى الله عز وجل. فقد قال الله جل في علا في القرآن العظيم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وبعد, we begin by praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نحمده, we compliment Him. ونستعينه, and we ask Him for help. ونستغفره, and we beg for His forgiveness. ونؤمن به, and we believe in Him. ونتوكل عليه, and we put our trust completely in Allah. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to guide, no one can lead that person astray. And whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to leave astray, no one can guide that person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you and me in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, O you who are committed to iman and faith, ittaqullaha haqqa tuqatihi. Be aware of your relationship with Allah and be afraid of breaking that relationship in the way that He deserves. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. And don't ever give yourself the opportunity to die except that you're a Muslim. What I want to share with you today has to do with the qualities of courage and bravery. These are qualities that are from the utmost desired attributes of every Muslim man, woman, and child. When we think about bravery and courage, we know that these are qualities that we see consistently demonstrated amongst the greatest believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether we're looking back at the time of the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, or we're looking in present day within our region, around the world, wherever it may be. Being brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being courageous for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that the scholars mention that people are not born with mountains of courage, but it is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates for every believer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates when the believer makes that intention to be brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, takes the first step in that direction. And we've all witnessed when people are doing something brave, we think, man, how can a person do this? How can they have so much courage? How can they sacrifice their time, their wealth, their physical well-being, whatever it may be? How can they speak up in that situation? And when that person is going through that, they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's facilitating that for them. Even though it doesn't mean it's on cruise control or it's easy or it's automatic struggle. It's a battle. When the outsider is looking at it, they see something that is almost superhuman. That how can a person have this much bravery and this much courage for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And when we think about the greatest of the greatest, the best amongst the companions, those who accepted Islam before the migration, we know that they demonstrated an enormous amount of courage. We extract lessons from that up until today. We name our children after these companions so that they can have maybe 1% of the courage that these companions had. And when we say their names, we feel something in our heart. When we think about Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha and the enormous amount of courage she demonstrated, that despite being an older woman, despite being somebody abandoned by her tribe, despite being somebody who's a minority, she is being physically tortured by Abu Jahl, and she spits on his face with her words of truth, and he's killed and tortured by her. She is a martyr. She is an example for every Muslim man, woman, and child from her time until today. When we think about Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and we know the torture that he went through on the scorching sand, under the blistering sun, this metal on top of him, a rock on top of him, people whipping him and torturing him. And despite all of that, he says, Ahad, Ahad, that I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I'm never going to give this up. So much so that as he's being tortured, he's torturing the one who is torturing him because of his bravery, because of his courage. And he's showing the entire Muslim ummah that when somebody is anchored in something that is immutable, unchangeable, in this tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this affirmation of the prophethood of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when somebody is standing for that haqq, then it's almost as if they are invincible by the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they have something that nobody can take away from them. And courage is not something that's just limited to the physical sense. Our scholars often mention that everybody says they're ready to die for Islam, but who's ready to live for Islam? Because living for Islam, speaking up for truth, reconciling between family members, being honest, being loyal, being a good worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are not things that happen automatically, happen very easily. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He smooths that path for whomever He wishes, but it is a struggle. And the scholars, they mention who's going to live for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we need to be brave in other aspects of our life as well, not just in the physical sense. That even these companions who accepted Islam so early on, yes, there was physical courage involved, no doubt about that, but also a social courage. Their qabila, their tribe, their family members, the people who have their back, who's always there to protect them, their social circle completely abandoned them when they accepted Islam. And now you are alone and isolated, and you have a small group of believers, but you can't interact with them. And so there's a social courage involved as well. And we know so many of our brothers and sisters in the community that accepted Islam, and we've seen and heard from them the struggles that they go through and the type of isolation that a person can feel. And alhamdulillah, we have a welcoming community, but it's something that whether somebody accepted Islam or they're born into Islam, whatever the case may be, that there is a social courage involved. When somebody says that, you know what, I'm going to give up my time for these things that are bad for my akhirah, that I'm not going to spend time maybe with these people, I'm not going to do this thing, and instead they're going to replace it with something else, then sometimes people, they abandon you. And people, they give up on you. And people, they don't want to interact with you because you're taking a different path. And so yes, it takes courage even in that area. There is also economic courage. That when these companions, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, accepted Islam, the Meccan believers, they didn't get paychecks on like the 15th of the month, the end of the month. They didn't get a steady paycheck. They were merchants, and at sometimes they had huge expenditures, and then they had to network and sell, and then they would get maybe a burst of money or small pieces of money throughout the year, depending on whatever they're doing. And people, they didn't want to buy and sell from them. People didn't want them as merchants anymore. And so now these companions who are exuding so much bravery and courage, they're showing us that there is also an economic component to that. That they're worried, how are they going to provide for their families? That it takes courage to do something like that. And what I want to share with you today is a lesson from the life of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us a lesson about bravery and courage. And also teaches us that when somebody is trying to be brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that something might intimidate you, something might make you nervous or worried. How should you react in that situation? And in this lesson, in this story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also shows us an outcome of being brave and courageous for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this story, Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam, they're coming upon a day known as Yawm al-Zina, a day of decoration. It's a day in which the Egyptian people, they don't have to go to work. The slave class, Bani Israel, they don't go to work. Everybody's going to gather and they're going to witness a spectacle. They're going to listen to a message. They're going to see some type of demonstration. And there are two teams that are going to present. One is the team of Fir'aun and falsehood, of his magicians. These are individuals who are very clever, very smart. In their society, if somebody was very bright, they wouldn't say, oh, you should go become a doctor or engineer. They would say, oh, this kid, he should become a magician. This kid is really smart. He's got talent. And so these are people that have been working for months to come up with the best trick, the best illusion, something that is so awe-inspiring that when people see this, they will want to submit to the message of Fir'aun. And on this other side is Musa alayhi salam, Harun alayhi salam, the side of al-haqq. Musa alayhi salam has a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This message that lives within every single one of us. The one of La ilaha illallah. The one that there is nothing worthy of our worship or our obedience, our love, our fear. That Tawheed means to unify. That all of this is centralized and directed and rooted in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else. And so he has this message of haqq. He has a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a glimpse as to how this unfolded, how this event took place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first tells us about what's happening before the event happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالُوا يَا مُوسَى إِمَّا أَن تُلْقِيَ وَإِمَّا أَن نَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَلْقَى. That these magicians, they approached Musa alayhi salam, and they are so confident that they're going to win, that they're going to be victorious, that they ask Musa alayhi salam, do you want to go first, or should we be the ones who go first? And when they say the word first, they attribute it to themselves, meaning that they are very prepared. They're ready. This is not something that they're going into haphazardly. And they're so confident that they're going to win, they're giving their opponent the choice that, hey, you can go first or we can go first. In the end, it's not going to matter because we are going to be superior. We're going to win in the end. And now Musa alayhi salam has a choice to make. And Musa alayhi salam, not only does he give the response of somebody who is confident, but the way that he says it is also full of confidence. He knows that he has the better product. He has the correct message. So he tells them, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ بَلْ أَلْقُوا. He says, rather, you guys can go first. He knows that what he's going to present will outshine anything that they can do, especially in contrast to whatever they perform. That when they see their trickery, that's one thing. But when they see a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's another thing altogether. And it is the difference between day and night. And so he says, بَلْ أَلْقُوا. He says, you guys go ahead and go first. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the next thing he tells us in the same ayah, in the next ayah, فَإِذَا حِبَالُهُمْ وَعَصِيُّهُمْ يُخَيَّلُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ سِحْرِهِمْ أَنَّهَا تَسْعَى. That the next thing that happens, that suddenly, like before you know it, the next thing that happens is that these magicians are already performing, and they throw their strings and sticks, and to Musa alayhi salam, they look like snakes moving back and forth. So these magicians, they've gone on stage or wherever they're performing, and they've thrown sticks and strings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell us the reaction of the audience. That if there's hundreds and thousands of eyes and hearts witnessing this, and minds that are processing this, He doesn't tell us how do they react. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the opponent of these magicians. How is he reacting in this situation? Because that gives you an idea as to what's happening everywhere else. That to Musa alayhi salam, it looked as if these sticks and strings were snakes moving back and forth. That it was impressive to Musa alayhi salam, so you can only imagine how magnificent it might have seemed to the rest of the world, to everybody else who's witnessing this. And now Musa alayhi salam, he has a natural reaction to this. Musa alayhi salam is being brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first lesson that we learned is that he started off with confidence. That when somebody is representing the truth, it's one thing that we're weak, we're deficient. We have flaws and we have gaps, and there's no doubt about that. But what we're representing is not flawed. The truth of Islam does not have that weakness. And so he starts off with confidence. But then something happens that shakes him up a little bit. And him being a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's still a human being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the reaction that he has. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً مُوسَى. That Musa alayhi salam, he started to get apprehensive. He started to get nervous. Why is Musa alayhi salam, why are you getting worried? You have a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're going to throw a staff or a stick and it's going to become a real snake. You have a message that is going to give people salvation. It's going to help them in this world and it's going to save them in the akhirah. Why is Musa alayhi salam, why is he getting nervous? Because our people are so impressed by what they just saw. Are they going to even care about my message? Are they going to even pay attention? That it's one thing that if you're at work and some other company has a better product or a worse product, an inferior product, but their presentation is so amazing, now do people even care about what you're going to tell them or what you're going to show them? Are people ready to receive this message that you have to share? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a very valuable lesson. That when somebody gets nervous or apprehensive, that maybe you're telling somebody about Islam and then they ask you something and you get flustered a little bit. Something happens that shakes you up. One of the most important things you can do in that situation, as Musa alayhi salam does, فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً مُوسَى. That he kept that nervousness inside of himself. Because if somebody sees weakness in you, they're going to think your message is weak. But what he's representing is not weak. And so Musa alayhi salam, he kept that inside of himself. Such that if somebody saw him, they would still observe the same calm and collected individual that they saw before. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْنَا لَا تَخَفْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْأَعْلَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds him that don't be scared, you are superior. You are the one who's on top. That maybe when we stand up for the truth, whether it's something happening at work, maybe people are lying about how many hours they worked in a timesheet, And you're worried that if you don't go along with that, what's going to happen to you? People are going to speak up. They're going to be against you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding anyone who's speaking up for the truth that you are superior in that situation. You are the one who's on top in that situation. And even if the world sees you as a failure or a loser, or they see you as weak or downtrodden, or whatever the case may be, this will be clear on the day of judgment. The winners and the losers, the victors and those who failed, it will be extremely clear. In fact, those who oppose the truth, those who are staunchly against it and reject it, even in their grave, they will know the truth. But that belief at that point will not do them any good. And so there is a reminder for those who are standing up for the truth that they are superior in that situation. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَلْقِ مَا فِي يَمِينِكَ. Throw what's in your right hand. تَلْقَفْ مَا صَنَعُوا. It will swallow, it will engulf whatever they made. إِنَّمَا صَنَعُوا كَيْدُ سَاحِرٍ وَلَا يُفْلِحُ السَّاحِرُ حَيْثُ أَتَى. That these magicians, they only did what magicians do, and magicians never succeed no matter what they try. The next step in terms of being brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to follow through with the process that you set out to do, even if you have to adapt or adjust a little bit. So now he does what he's supposed to do. He goes to where he's supposed to go. He sends whatever email he's supposed to send. He talks to whoever he has to talk to. And in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him to throw what's in his right hand. This staff, this snake, this stick, which will become a snake and swallow all these fake snakes that were made. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a very valuable lesson about being brave. One of the things that makes us nervous or worried is our definition of things, our false perception, misperception of things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He defines things for what they actually are. That somebody in the audience, maybe they're looking at a magician and they're thinking, man, this person is a winner. And they're looking at Musa alayhi salam, Harun alayhi salam, and they're thinking these guys are going to lose for sure. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives the right definition for certain things, for everything, and He says that magicians do not succeed no matter what they try. That in the end, they will lose no matter what. And so maybe the dunya, they look at a woman who's dressed inappropriately and they see a winner. They see somebody who's confident or successful. And they see a believing woman who dresses modestly, and they see somebody who is weak, somebody who is a prisoner. They see somebody who is oppressed. But we know the right definition of things is that the other woman who's dressed inappropriately is a prisoner of what men want her to be. Whereas the believing woman, she has this huge value and this obedience and this worship and this enormous amount of good deeds for every sacrifice and every struggle. And so putting things in their proper place gives us confidence. It gives us the right motivation, and the misunderstanding of something, it becomes as if you're taking a small thing and you're putting it right in front of your face. And so you get intimidated by it, when in reality it's something very insignificant. And lastly, the last ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سُجَّدًا قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ هَارُونَ وَمُوسَى. That the next thing that happened is that the magicians, they fell down into sajda. They prostrated. They saw this miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have heard and studied the message of Musa alayhi salam, Harun alayhi salam, and now it's become crystal clear to them that this is the truth and there is no doubt about it. They could have accepted Islam in any way that they wanted. But they did something so bold and so courageous that they made sajda right then and there in front of Fir'aun, who later on in a few ayat, he's going to kill them and crucify them and torture them, but in front of the entire audience. And the scholars mention that when somebody is courageous for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it encourages other people to act in kind. That when somebody says, you know what, I really don't know how to read the Quran anymore, it's been so long, and they take that first step, it's going to encourage other people as well. When somebody says, oh, I need to reconcile with my cousin, my aunt, my uncle, whatever it may be, no matter who started it or whose fault it is, when you are brave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then things are facilitated and other people are encouraged to act in kind. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على سيد الأولين والآخرين إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. As you've been entering into the masjid, you might have seen that there's a table outside from Helping Hand. Helping Hand is here today to collect funds in order to sponsor food and drink for families in the month of Ramadan. To sponsor one family is $100 a month. Most of the food and those supplies will be purchased locally within that region. Last year, Helping Hand helped around 400,000 beneficiaries, and inshallah the goal today in this Jum'ah is to help 200 families. So $20,000, $100 per month for that month of Ramadan, that you can sponsor a family for food and drink for their morning meal and their evening meal. And so inshallah, please be generous on your way out. This is our own form of courage and bravery, whether it's economic or whatever the case may be. So as you're exiting, please donate generously. Think about how many families you can support on your way out. 1 family, 2 family, 5 families, whatever it may be. And inshallah, as you're breaking your fast in this month of Ramadan, you can take solace in the fact that inshallah you helped some other family also have some drink, have some food in a time that's difficult for them, but a month that's very important. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا آمنا فاكتبنا مع الشاهدين ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين اللهم إنا نسألك لذة النظر إلى وجهك الكريم والشوق إلى لقائك عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأوفوا بعهد الله إذا عاهدتم ولا تنقضوا الأيمان بعد توكيدها وقد جعلتم الله عليكم كفيلا والله يعلم ما تفعلون فاذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم ودعوه يستجب لكم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر وأعلى وأجل وأقم الصلاة. If everybody can get up and move towards the center, there's a lot of brothers waiting in the back. Should I ask Umar Rahman? Yeah, Umar Rahman, if you want to just come up.